you. Thank you. I don't think I've got voice. Have I got voice? Yes, I have got voice. Great, thank you. And welcome everyone. It's so good to be here. I love the little country towns because I'm actually just a country girl. And it's the best life. And I know that. And I know when I came last year, I was, and I think every one of you were touched by the story of the tornado. And it also is a beautiful illustration that no matter what we go through, we serve a solution God. And God is able to bring out of sometimes even the most difficult things in our life, He can bring out to the most wonderful things. And this little tiny town, which apparently has 350 people living in it, and I understand there's close to about 700 here, and I know you are here because you are interested in your body, you're interested in getting the most out of your body. And I thank God every day that we live in a body that has an inbuilt ability to heal itself. But then the question arises, if we live in a body with an inbuilt ability to heal itself, why are so many people sick? That's a very reasonable question. Well, the body will heal itself if you give it the right conditions. And one disease that's just about exploded in the last 30 years is diabetes. And about the same time that this exploded, something else also exploded, and that is weight gain. In Australia, 68% of Australians are either overweight or obese. Now, Newton's third law of motion states that to every action, there's an equal and an opposite reaction. Why? Proverbs 26 verse 2 says, "The curse causeless shall not come." It's Old English. What it means is no problem, no curse, no disease happens without a cause. There is always a reason. I grew up in a home where my father was an inventor, my brother was an inventor, and everything that came into the home, Dad and Dave pulled apart because they wanted to know why and how it works. That's what I was brought up with. But then it really touched me. It affected me when I was 18 and I wanted to get my license. My father said I couldn't get my license until I learned how an engine worked. I was not happy. None of my girlfriends had to learn how an engine worked. And I remember sitting with Dad every night, and I remember hearing about pistons or spark plugs going off and pistons going up and down, but doesn't it make a lot of sense to know something, just a little bit, about the car you're driving? How much more important is it to know something about the house we live in? Nothing happens without a cause. So if ever the princes, do you remember the princes? We discussed them a little last night, and the Bible says in Psalm 146 verse 3, "Put not your trust in princes, neither in the Son of Man, in whom there is no help." What are the princes? The princes are the authorities in the field. So if a prince says to you, "You've got diabetes, you've got pre-diabetics, you will need to do this," you say, "Thank you so much for your advice, I'm going to seriously consider this," and you leave and you investigate. You investigate your options because there are so many options. And I'm so glad that finally, after many years, my book Sustain Me was printed and isn't available, because my aim was to produce a handbook for the home. So that if anything happens, and if the princes give you a diagnosis, you can go home and you can open Sustain Me. Now, what does it say? What are the simple things that you can do? Because the fact is, the human body was designed to heal itself. And it'll heal itself if you give it the right conditions. Even diabetes? Well, in the little book, Ministry of Healing, and I'm so glad that's been made available here too, there's a chapter called The Physician, the Educator. Did you know that's what physician means, educate? In The Physician, the Educator, there's a little formula there that I first started to use when I read this book many years ago, probably 45 years ago, and I still use it today. And the formula is this: in case of sickness, the cause should be ascertained. So how do you discover the cause? Well, one of the easiest ways to discover the cause is to look at the history. Look at the history. When did this begin? Because we are what we are today because of everything that's ever happened to us in our life. So in case of sickness, the cause should be ascertained. Unhealthful conditions changed. Get out of the mouldy house. Maybe you're in a job that's actually a little toxic. Unhealthful conditions changed. Wrong habits corrected. How do you know if the habits are wrong? You know the habits are wrong by looking at lifestyle, looking at the best lifestyle for the human body, which my book Sustain Me outlines. So in case of sickness, the cause should be ascertained, unhealthful conditions changed, wrong habits corrected, then nature is to be assisted in her efforts to expel impurities and re-establish right conditions back in the system. So where do we start? Well, your body will tell you. There's your symptoms. Your symptoms are your body speaking to you. Your body saying, excuse me, I got a problem here. And then, when you look at your symptoms, you look in Sustain Me, and you look at trying different things. You're trying different things. There's a chapter on water therapies. There's a chapter on poultice therapies. And you try different things, and you watch your body's response. And what your body will say to you, I like that. And what your body will say to you, no, I don't like that. That's your best guide. Your body can tell you what no man can tell you. Your body can tell you what no test can tell you. Your body is your guide. So it's important to begin and to cultivate the ability to listen. And if you don't listen to the first whisper, the body will begin to scream. And when it starts screaming, it's doing damage. So please listen. So if someone has a sore knee, do you know the first thing I do is I discover why is the knee sore? Did something happen to the knee? Oh, well, yeah, 30 years ago I tore it in a basketball accident. And what did you do? Oh, well, I went to the doctor and he put an injection in and it stopped the pain and I kept playing basketball. Huh? Now, do you know what the knee was saying? You know what that pain was saying? Can you stop? Can you actually put the leg up and let it heal? But you know what the injection did? It stopped the pain. And pain has a purpose. Pain is a voice. Listen to it. Listen to it. It's actually telling you something. It's telling you something. And so now, 30 years later, this knee's in a terrible way. And it all because not so much of the injury, but for the fact that the knee was pushed after the injury. It was not allowed to heal. Listen. Because if you don't listen to the first whisper, the body will start screaming. And so what are some of the causes of diabetes? I'd like to investigate what are some of the causes. Never in the history of mankind have human beings eaten so many carbohydrates. We call them carbs. And traditionally, everyone loves the carbs. And I find that in every culture, there's a type of carbohydrate. And it almost seems today is that we've gathered all the different carbohydrates from all the different cultures and put them together. Have you noticed? Let's put them together and see what happens. Cereal. Cereal is certainly a carbohydrate. Bread is a carbohydrate. And we're not going to do all carbohydrates or we'll fill the board. So we're just going to do a section on cakes. So this cakes is, we're going to say cakes, etc., because that's donuts, cookies, biscuits, yes, cakes, croissants, muffins, pretzels, so there's a whole lot there. Another one is pizza. I didn't know what a pizza was when I was a child, but it's a common carbohydrate fast food today. Pasta, I didn't know what pasta was as a child. So in the 1960s, there wasn't a lot of pasta around. Well, what did we eat? I'm a fifth generation Australian, Scottish descent. What did we eat? We ate sausages or chops, mashed potatoes, frozen peas or beans every night except for Sunday. Then we'd have the roast lamb. Everyone I knew ate like that. All my relatives ate like that. All the little church family I went to ate like that. I thought everyone in the world ate like that. But when I turned 18, 19, 20, started going to restaurants, I discovered a few other things. But today they're common foods. Potatoes is another carbohydrate, and rice, I didn't know what rice was till I was about 20, but it's a common food today. And last and certainly least in nutritive value is the pure crystallized acid extracted from the sugarcane plant. Would you agree with me that we've become high carbohydrate consumers? Now, down on the farm, where I lived out in the rainforest raising my children, this was not fast food. This is slow food. It takes a while to make cereal, it takes a while to make bread, it takes a while to make all the cooks and the cakes and the biscuits and cookies, etc., etc. It takes a while to make pasta, it takes a while to make pasta, it takes a while to cook the potatoes, to cook the rice. But today in the city, you can go into any fast food shop and it can be in your mouth within minutes. I don't think anyone chose to eat this way. I think it's just convenient. And we're such a fast society and it's just there, it's just convenient. But what I want to show you is how it's affected our pancreas. Because our pancreas, let's draw our pancreas, it basically lives under our left rib, and our pancreas is the organ that balances blood sugar levels. And there are two hormones that are released from the pancreas. One is insulin, and insulin's role is to get the glucose out of the blood and into the cell. And the other hormone is glucagon. And glucagon is the hormone that's designed to get the blood sugar level up again. This one gets it down, this one gets it up. So these two hormones, they balance blood glucose levels. So let's go to the cell. So when we go to the cell, we start to see where the glucose, basically, it's designed to go. And yesterday, we looked at what happens in the gastrointestinal tract, how the food is broken down. So now we're going to have a look at what happens once it's broken down. It gets into the blood and it goes to the liver. And the first place that the liver sends the glucose. So all of these foods broke down to glucose. And then the liver sends it number one to the cell. So the glucose gets into the cell. How does it get into the cell? Under the action of insulin. Insulin's the key that unlocks the door to get the glucose into the cell. So insulin gets the glucose into the cell. When it gets into the cell, it goes through a 20-step pathway. This 20-step pathway delivers 2 units of energy. Isn't that why we eat? That whole incredible process that we looked at yesterday is designed to break that food down to tiny little particles, and then it gets into the blood, and then it's delivered to the cell. I call the cell the CBD of the human body, the central business district of the human body, because that's what we are. We're just a bunch of cells. Eye cells, brain cells, skin cells, muscle cells. After the 20-step pathway, a chemical form of glucose is created called pyruvate. And pyruvate, as the chemical form of glucose, gets fed into what is often called the powerhouse of the cell. Even though this is only an 8-step pathway, it's called the powerhouse of the cell because of its ability to deliver 36 units of energy. What makes the difference? This 20-step pathway, no oxygen. This 8-step pathway has oxygen. What a difference oxygen makes. But we're looking at the journey of glucose. So the first place that the glucose is sent is to the cell. But only so much glucose can be put through that energy pathway. And so now some of the glucose gets stored as glycogen. Glycogen is a name given to quick-release glucose stores. And they're little molecules of glucose. And they're just sitting particularly in the muscle cell. They're called glycogen. Glycogen is a very important key in managing blood sugar levels for the diabetic, as you will see. That's why you don't need to eat before you exercise. Because if you eat before your exercise, you're going to create a war. The energy wants to go to digestion, but some of the body's energy wants to go to moving those muscles along, and you can get a bit of a war. Yes, a gentle walk after lunch is a good idea, but not running up and down hills or chopping wood or doing any strenuous exercise. The best time to do strenuous exercise is early in the morning, because you've got a nice store here, a nice reserve of glucose. Quick-release glucose stores called glycogen. Only so much glycogen can be stored. And on a high carbohydrate diet, we've still got glucose left over. And so now the body stores it in the most amazing fuel deposits in the body. It's called fat. And on this high carbohydrate diet, what's happening to people today? They're getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. This is the third place that the liver causes all the excess glucose to be stored is as fat. What I've given you here is the basic science. Can you see that fat doesn't make you fat? We've been spun a lie. The princes have got it wrong again. And on this fat-free diet, are people losing weight? No. No. What fat does, it gives the feeling of satiation or satisfaction. And do you remember last night we looked at 3 essential food groups? Fibre, slowly releases the glucose. Protein, because that's what's digested in the stomach. And fat, because it coats the food, it's a little bit longer. Fibre, protein and fat give the feeling of satiation, satisfaction. The best weight loss diet is a diet where you are not hungry. And the princes, put not your trust in princes, neither in the Son of Man in whom there is no help. What have they told us since the 1980s, 90s? Stop the fat. Is that right? You want to lose weight? Stop the fat. Is it working? No. And what's the definition of insanity? To do what you've always done and expect different results. And then in the 1980s, 1990s, there was a doctor who became very famous because he blew the whistle on this. He was called Dr. Robert Atkins, is that right? And put his patients on a high-fat, high-protein diet, and they all lost weight. Nutritionists hated him. His book was #1 on the New York Times best-selling list 4 years running. Why did the people love him? Because it worked. It worked. It's not the fat. I've just shown you the basic science, and Atkins knew the science. So he put his patients on a diet That was very similar to what we looked at last night, which was high fibre, generous protein and fats, and they lost weight. You see, the fact is, if you're not giving your body a lot of carbohydrates, your body is able to break down your fat stores to glucose. It's called gluconeogenesis, creating glucose from the stored fat. And that's why his patients, the weight was falling off them. The carbohydrates stopped. And when the carbohydrates stop, the body can convert protein and fat to glucose if it needs to, and it breaks down the fat stores to give the glucose. It's a great idea. How do you do this on a plant-based diet? Let me show you. Because what Atkins discovered after a year of his patients being on this diet for weight loss, which was, remember, the 3 essentials again, the 3 essentials: fibre. Most people don't realise on the Atkins diet you had to eat 3 cups of vegetables a day. Protein, yes, meat, butter, cream, cheese, eggs. And, yes, fat, meat, butter, cream, cheese, eggs, it's got the fat. I'm interested in his science because it worked. And you can't deny that it didn't work. But as a plant-based lady, I want to know how you can do this on a plant-based diet. So I went to Genesis 1:29. Let's go to Genesis 1:29, where God's telling Adam and Eve what to eat. And God said, "Behold, I've given you every herb bearing seed." So we're going to look at the food. We're going to look at the protein content and the carbohydrate content. And God said, "Behold, I've given you every herb-bearing seed." What's a herb-bearing seed? A herb-bearing seed is a grain. Wheat, rye, barley, oats, amaranth, buckwheat, millet, quinoa. Another herb-bearing seed is a legume. So when I say leg, that's not the leg of a cow, okay? That's legume. Or your beans. Chickpeas, lima beans, black-eyed beans. And another seed is just your seed. So let's do an assessment of the grains: wheat, rye, barley, oats, amaranth, buckwheat, quinoa, millet. High in protein, high in carbohydrate. How many on our carbohydrate list are from the grain department? Grain, we could do lots of ticks here on the cake department. Grain. The majority on our carbohydrate list are from the grain department. What about the beans? Lentils, chickpeas, lima beans, black-eyed beans, cannelloni beans, pinto beans, barlotti beans. There's so many. High in protein, but they are medium to low in carbohydrates. The fact is that the beans are about 1/3 the carbohydrate content that you will find in the grain. Seed, sesame seed, pumpkin seed, sunflower seed, chia seed, flax seed or linseed, high in protein, low in carbohydrate. So God said, "Behold, I've given you every herb-bearing seed and every tree, in the which is the fruit of a seed." What's the fruit of this tree? Is a nut. So we have so many nuts: macadamia, almond, Brazil, hazelnut, pecan, walnut, cashew. So many nuts, high in protein, low in carbohydrate. So what Atkins found, which as I showed you, you can do on a plant-based diet, it's a matter of decreasing the grain part of the meal. And carbohydrates are not bad. My husband would never forgive me if the potatoes stopped. No, they're not bad. It's only when they're overdone and refined. So if these are the 3 essential food groups, never negotiate the 3 essentials. And if the carbohydrates have been proven to be the non-essential, that's the one you negotiate. is the carbohydrates. And that's what Atkins found, drastically dropping the carbohydrates. He had amazing weight loss. So you can do it on a plant-based diet by decreasing the grain and increasing the legume, nut, seed part of the meal. That's an easy way to do it. What Atkins also found, that his diabetic patients were coming off their medication. Type 1 and type 2. He only did this for weight loss. And yet the diabetics were getting improvement. You see, on this high carbohydrate diet, the pancreas is being overworked. And when the carbohydrates are drastically dropped, and the fibre, protein and fat are increased, you got a happy pancreas. There's no doubt about it, there was no diabetes till sugar was refined. No mention of diabetes in Hippocrates' writings. That's 400 years BC, because there was no refining of sugar then. I think there's some reports of it in the 13th, 14th century. The 15th century it became more, and that's when the slave trade began. And did you know that the slave trade was developed to man the sugarcane fields in the West Indies? There's a movie, you might have seen it. I think it came out about 10 years ago, called Amazing Grace. It's a true story of William Wilberforce, who was the key abolitionist in the abolition of the slave trade. Fascinating story. It's important to know our history, because what's happening to us today is much because of what happened in our history. So there's no doubt about it, as the sugar was refined, the diabetes began to rise. And there's an interesting book, it's an American book, it's called Sugar Blues, by a writer called William Dufty. It's a fascinating book, he's an excellent writer. It's very interesting reading. And he shows how the diabetes came around the time that the sugar was refined. But something else has come along that has caused an explosion of diabetes. In Australia, I know the figure's 500 new diabetics diagnosed every day in Australia. So what's really contributed to this is something else. Sugar doesn't get let off the hook, but something else. It's the grain that most cereals, breads, and all your cakes, pizzas, and pastas are made out of. What grain is that? It's wheat. And when you look at the history of wheat, in the 1950s, Dr. Norman Bulag and a team of scientists in Mexico put wheat through intensive crossbreeding. Why? Well, they wanted to create a plant with a high yield of grain to help with the starvation crisis in Mexico, in India, in Africa. And no one objects to someone wanting to help with the starvation crisis, but you know, you can't improve on God. They created a plant that can produce 6 to 8 times the grain than the original plant. And it only grows that high, have you noticed? When I was a little girl, the wheat grew that high. But today it only grows that high. It's got a thick stem, it only grows that high. It can only be like that because it has to hold this heavy yield of grain. So Dr. Norman Bulag, he got a Nobel Prize in 1976 for this hybridised wheat. It was rushed through with no safety studies. Does that sound familiar? Rushed through with no safety studies. They didn't think they had to do safety studies on wheat. And it's only now it's starting to be revealed the problems that it has caused. Rushed through with no safety studies. So by the end of the 1970s, this wheat was worldwide. By the 1990s, every cereal, bread, cake, etc., pizza, pasta, all made out of this hybridised wheat. Notice the time frame, 1990s. When did we see the real explosion of diabetes? It's around that same time. So let's investigate and find out why. When they hybridised the wheat, they changed the starch structure. And the structure that was created in the hybridisation of the wheat is called No, that doesn't go there. It's called amylopectin A. So amylopectin A is the name of the starch that was created in the hybridisation of the wheat. So I want to show you what this amylopectin A does. So here's blood sugar levels. When amylopectin A is taken into the body, it causes a massive rise in blood sugar. And whenever you've got a quick rise, you've got a corresponding dump. That's the A. And if you're familiar with the glycemic index of food, you'll know that bananas and potatoes are quite high on the glycemic index, and bananas and potatoes contain amylopectin B. So what's amylopectin B like? It doesn't give as high or as quick a rise, and so it doesn't get as big a low. That's your amylopectin B. Amylopectin C is the starch found in chickpeas, lima beans, black-eyed peas, lentils, all your legumes. And that starch gives a lovely steady rise, lovely steady maintenance, lovely steady drop. What does every cell in our body want? A steady, sure, consistent delivery of glucose. What does your pancreas want? A steady, sure, consistent delivery of glucose. What's glycemic index? Glycemic index is how quickly the glucose in that food is delivered into the blood. So your baseline sits at about 55. So at 55, here's the GI. 55 is baseline, so anything under 55 is considered low GI. So the low GI foods are excellent for the diabetic because you get a slower delivery of fuel. Slower means a more lasting delivery. So berries sit at 26. So they're excellent fruit for diabetics because it's low on the glycemic index. Grapefruit. Grapefruit is not a surprise that it sits low. It's not a real sweet fruit. Where does sugar sit on the glycemic index? Sugar sits at 59. That is no surprise. Whether it be white or tan or brown, that's where it sits. What about white refined wheat? So we'll say white wheat, that's white bread, white cereal, white pasta. It sits at 69. That's higher than a candy. Why? It's because of the amylopectin A. Remember that starch? That amylopectin A causes a massive, quick rise in blood glucose levels. Wholemeal or whole wheat, it sits at 72. How could whole wheat be higher on the glycemic index than white, than even sugar? It's because of the amylopectin A. Remember, in the hybridization process, this starch was created. They weren't looking at that, they just wanted a plant with a high yield of grain. But in their hybridization of the wheat, they inadvertently created a starch that gets the blood sugar level up higher even than a candy. So why does whole wheat get it up higher than white? Because it's not refined, it's got more amylopectin A in it. There's a book called Wheat Belly by Dr. William Davis. It's a bestseller. In my book, Sustain Me. I have a chapter on diabetes, and I've got the books listed there. And if you want to explore this in more detail, you'll see it. Because he explains it in detail. He explains in detail what happened to the wheat. And that's what happened to the wheat. One lady said, she started crying when she heard this. I said, what's the matter? She said, I'm a diabetic. I'm 69. I was diagnosed 4 years ago. I do everything they tell me. I have whole wheat pasta, whole wheat cereal, whole wheat bread, whole wheat everything. And every 6 months I go to the doctor and he puts me on more insulin. She said, I'm so frustrated because I'm doing everything I'm told and I'm getting worse. And what's the definition of insanity? To do what you've always done and expect different results. She said, I'm not like the lady down the road. She eats candy, she eats all the junk in the world, she lives on soda pops. No wonder she's got diabetes. She said, I don't do that. She said, I'm crying because I've been so frustrated. And now you've solved the puzzle. It's the wheat. So why doesn't the diabetic the diabetic counsellor, why don't they tell their diabetics this? Well, we're not going to go here. We haven't got time to go there, but I know in Australia a lot of wheat is grown. I know that there are a lot of farmers and they're in debt because they've brought this big machinery to harvest their wheat. They grow tons of it. This would be shocking news for them. They could go back to the non-hybrid wheat. It's called spelt or Enkenhorn. But they're going to get a loss in money. Because remember what this hybridised wheat does, it gives them 6 to 8 times more grain per acre. That's 6 to 8 times more money per acre. They've got to pay their bills. So this explains the puzzle. So let me tell you a little bit more about the glycemic index, because for a diabetic this can make a big difference. Let me give you an illustration. Potato is high in the glycemic index. Sweet potato is reasonably low. So what's the difference? You cut them both, what's the difference? You can't see it, but under a microscope it is revealed that in the potato it's a loose fibre structure, and so the glucose is released quickly. Whereas the sweet potato, under the microscope, it's a tight fibre structure, so it slowly releases the glucose. Banana's high, berries are low. What's the difference? Same thing. The banana has a very loose fibre structure, so the glucose is released quickly, and that quick release means blood sugar level goes up quite quickly. Whereas the berries, it's a tighter structure, and so the glucose is slowly released. So for a diabetic, just making a change in the foods, going to low GI foods, it's not hard to Google glycemic index and find a chart where you get the low glycemic foods, and that can make a big difference. But as you can see by what I've shown you, just stopping the wheat can make a huge difference. And in America, you can buy a bread, they'll even deliver it to you. It's called Simple Needs. Most Whole Foods and Sprouts, shops like that sell it. And that Simple Needs is a sourdough gluten-free bread. And that Simple Needs, that gluten-free bread isn't like many other gluten-free breads that are packed with white rice and potato starch that gets the blood sugar level up high. No, the grains that are in the Simple Need breads are whole grains, and they're all gluten-free. And that bread will stay fresh in your fridge for 6 weeks. And all you have to do is toast it and it goes nice and light again. So that's a great bread that you can use if you're wanting to conquer your diabetes, because it's low GI And the sourdough bread, it breaks down the protein or the gluten in the grain, making the starch and the protein much easier accessible for the body. So for weight loss and for conquer diabetes, the key is get those carbohydrates down and eliminate the wheat. Do I eat wheat? Sometimes, not much. But if I had diabetes, I wouldn't touch it until I'd conquered my diabetes. So let's put weight loss and diabetes through the Sustain Me principles, and you will see how this formula is very effective at conquering weight and also conquering diabetes. Sunshine. So why is sunshine important with diabetes? Because sunshine, when it hits the skin, it causes a release of vitamin D, and vitamin D is essential in the assimilation of calcium, and those minerals are necessary for the pancreas to function effectively. Use of water. One of the diabetics' best kept secret is these little glycogen stores. And these glycogen stores must have water to be released. See, there's a membrane around the cell that's a bilayered membrane. And that bilayered membrane has sodium-potassium pumps in it that balances the sodium-potassium in and out of the cell. And in this bilayered membrane, there's a little motor. And when we take a crystal of Celtic salt, about the size of a sesame seed, put it in our mouth, crunch it, and then drink our water, the magnesium in that Celtic salt, it causes the water to be taken into the cell. And when that water goes through that bilayered membrane, it causes this little motor to start spinning. And that little motor, when it starts spinning, gives us a unit of energy. And that's why the diabetic does not need to eat every 2 hours. Isn't that what they tell diabetics? Eat every 2 hours. Now, last night when we went our journey through our gastrointestinal tract, did you notice where your nutrients are absorbed? In the small intestine. So even when our stomach's empty, you don't need to eat food because you're still getting those nutrients. But we need to be hydrated to access those nutrients. We need to be hydrated to access, if our blood glucose levels are getting low, these glycogen stores. That little bit of salt and that glass of water allows us to access nutrients, especially those glycogen stores. How much water do we need? Ideally, 8 glasses a day. If you're not used to 8 glasses, start slowly. Start early. That's how I get it in. I start early. I have it by my bed. Sleep. We need to sleep, especially in the night hours. And you might have heard the old saying, early to bed, early to rise, makes a man healthy, wealthy and wise, and helps him to conquer his diabetes. Just a little additive I've put on there. And let me give you God's perfect mathematical formula. 8 hours to work, 8 hours to play, 8 hours to sleep. Got that? I can give you a moment so you can write it down if you like. I always thought 7 was God's favourite number, but I think that he likes 8 too. When we're sleeping, especially those hours before midnight, try always to get at least 2, ideally 3 before midnight. Because while we're sleeping, hormones are released that are responsible for rest, regeneration, rejuvenation and healing. So looking at healing the pancreas, those hours before midnight are important. Trust in God. Thank God every day that we have a body that's got an inbuilt ability to heal itself. And remember, God's way of healing is based on faith. And faith means we're not quite there yet, but we have faith that we will get there. That's what God's method of healing on is based. I'm not there, but I know I'm going to get there. Abstain. There are some things that must stop if you want weight loss and if you want to conquer diabetes. What are the things that must stop? Sugar. If someone has diabetes, they need even to stop the honey and the maple syrup, even the natural sugars, until they've got a happy pancreas. When that pancreas is happy, when it's starting to balance blood glucose levels a little bit better, maybe they can have a little. Wheat. To conquer diabetes, wheat must stop. To get effective weight loss, wheat must also stop. Caffeine. What's caffeine got to do with this? I think I can hear a bit of murmur in the background there. If you're a coffee drinker, don't stop. Otherwise you won't be able to attend tomorrow night's meeting. That's a clear indication that this has got to get out of our diet. People say to me, do you drink coffee, Barbara? I say, no, I just watch the people suffer day one at our health retreat. That tells me quite clearly this stuff's not good stuff. And if you take it to give a lift, I can assure you it's not coming from the food you ate. That lift is it's an exciting lift coming from your adrenal glands. So to take coffee to get a lift is like taking out a loan to pay off your loan. Eventually there's nothing left. What's the old saying? Robbing Peter to pay Paul. Eventually Peter comes along wanting his bit. It doesn't work. And yet it's such a common stimulant that most people have. In his book, Caffeine Blues, Kochanski, he's got a chapter called Coming Off the Bean. And he shows how the best way to do it, if you have 3 cups of coffee a day, start having 3 half cups a day. And then start having 3/3 cups a day, then 3/4 cups a day, and little by little ease off it. Even having that, the roasted chicory, the roasted dandelion, you can even water down your coffee with things like that. And if you do that, often within a week or 2, you can be off it without any pain or suffering. So why does the coffee have to stop? Because what it does is it causes a crisis in the body. And whenever there's a crisis, there's an insulin release. Why is there an insulin release in a crisis? Because your cells need more fuel for the crisis. And so the caffeine contributes to overworking the pancreas. Why won't the doctor tell you that? Well, probably because he's drinking his coffee, is that right? Not everyone that drinks coffee has diabetes, but it is a contributing factor. Alcohol absolutely must stop because of the high sugar content of it. All your high GI foods ideally stop. This is if you want to conquer diabetes. Inhale through the nose. Genesis 2 verse 7, and God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils. This was not mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Nose. If you do a first aid course now, they don't do mouth-to-mouth anymore. And God didn't do mouth-to-mouth, it was nose. He breathed into Adam's nostril the breath of life. He became a living soul. Nose purifies the air. Nose humidifies the air. Nose warms the air. Nose balances blood gases. Nose pressurizes the air, making it perfect for the lungs. And if you're not sure if you're a nose breather in the night, there's a simple thing you can do. Tape your mouth up. Now you don't have to tape it up like that. You can just put a little bit of tape down here. Your bed partner will love the fact that you won't snore. And you can train your body back into nose breathing. You will get more oxygen, and if you'll notice here, more oxygen means more energy. Nutrition. We've looked at nutrition, we've looked at the importance of low GI foods, we've looked at the importance of the 3 essentials: high fibres, generous proteins, and great fats. Moderation in all the good things. What the research is showing today, nutritionally, that the best form of eating for the diabetic is what they call the 18-6 diet. What's the 18-6 diet? It's eating twice in a 24-hour period, 6 hours apart, giving an 18-hour rest. Now that's a little bit different to eating every 2 hours. Does that mean that Prince has got it wrong again? You know what, they also call it time-restricted eating. It came from the 5-2 diet or the intermittent fasting. We find at our retreat, every diabetic who does the 2 days juice fast are having to drop their insulin because their blood glucose levels are they're balancing out. So when we say moderation, moderation in time that you're eating. Exercise. Exercise does a powerful thing for weight loss and also for diabetes. Let me show you why. I'm going to have to rub a few things out because my cell's getting a bit messy here. And I'm going to show you how exercise has such a powerful effect in diabetes and in weight loss. So this pathway, the 20-step pathway, it's a very fast pathway. Whereas the 8-step pathway is quite a slow pathway. And the most effective form of exercise, it has been found today, is the high-intensity interval training. And the high-intensity interval training, as the name implies, are intervals of high intensity. What's high intensity? Running for your life. There's a couple of hills at Evening Shade, and whoa, you don't have to run up those hills, you just have to walk up and you're getting high intensity. High intensity is anything that gets the heart rate increased and the respiration increased. So there's this great little circuit at Evening Shade, and Jacqueline and I did it. We did it 3 times this morning. And we usually chat along, but when we're going up that hill, there's no chatting. And this is when you're really challenged to only nose breathe. So it could be walking very fast up a hill. It could be, if you've got gentle hills, it could be running. It could be running on flat ground. It could be push-ups. In fact, at many gyms they have circuits where you do different. You do push-ups in one. You might do pull-ups in another. You might do lifts on the other. You might be on the rowing machine on another. And what the research is showing, and I've looked at several books on this, 30 seconds. Now 30 seconds doesn't sound long. You try it when you're doing high intensity. It's a long time. And then recovery. What's recovery? For us, recovery is walking down the hill. It's such a big hill that we usually do recovery about 2/3 of the way up. And so with recovery, they've discovered that the best recovery is not just stopping, but doing some gentle exercise. So what I'll often do is I'll go into my arm exercises, 7 up, 7 down, 7 back, 7 forward, arm. So a few people ask me if I was getting writer's cramp. No, I do arm exercises every day. Or if I'm on the rebounder, if you jump with your arms out, you're strengthening your biceps. And if you put your palm up on the rebounder, you're strengthening your triceps. So I do arm exercise, and even just the tiny little circles, body starts screaming, keep going, but that's your arm strengthening. So recovery time is gentle. Most of the research has been done on exercise bikes. So on the exercise bike, recovery is just slowly cycling. Whereas high intensity is cycling as hard and fast as you can go. And many people who have ankle, knee or hip problems, they find that the exercise bike is better. And if the balance isn't good, they're holding on. So recovery is usually done for about 90 seconds. And this high intensity is done for a cycle of 6. Have you done the maths on that? That's 15 minutes. Isn't that good news? We're such a fast society today. And if you don't think you've got 15 minutes, it's time to do an assessment of your time. How much time do you spend on the computer, at the television, on your phone? You do have time. And when you see what this does, you will be convinced that this is something you've got to do. So I'm now going to show you why it is such a powerful form of exercise, especially in weight loss and diabetes. So you just got to find out what works for you. And by the way, recovery time is the best indicator of your fitness. And if at first it takes you 5 minutes to recover from 30 seconds high intensity, that's all right, because the more you do it, the stronger you will get. Note your recovery time, because what you'll find is the more you do this, the less time you take to recover, and that will be an encouragement to you. Remember, muscle knows no age. Whether you're 9 or 90, you can have strong muscles. So let's have a look at what's happening in the cell as we go through this. So when we're getting to the end of our second set of high intensity, the glycogen stores are being plucked. And as the glycogen stores are being plucked, of course they're being used. Remember what glycogen is? It's quick release glucose stores. Now, as we go into the high intensity, the 20-step speeds up and the 8-step speeds up. But there's a rate-setting enzyme in there which will always keep the 20-step faster and the 8-step slower. So when we're really moving, this 20-step pathway is producing more pyruvate than can be fed into the powerhouse, so it's stored as lactic acid. We've all heard of lactic acid. But what's remarkable in this form of exercise is when you're in recovery time, the liver converts that lactic acid back to pyruvate and feeds it into the powerhouse. So when you're in recovery time, you're burning just as much fuel as when you're running for your life. And when you're in recovery time, that lactic acid is being mopped up. So probably by the end of the third set, we've run out of glycogen stores. And the body knows it. And so what it does is it causes a release of the human growth hormone. The human growth hormone is naturally occurring. It's active when we're growing. I stopped growing at 16, that probably doesn't surprise you. It goes into retirement to be called upon when needed. And when you're doing the high intensity interval training, you're actually producing a little bit of a crisis, and the beauty of that is the body is adapting and adjusting, getting stronger. We've run out of glycogen stores, and so the brain stimulates the pituitary gland to release the human growth hormone. The human growth hormone releases hormone-sensitive lipase. Now, last night we talked about lingual lipase that breaks down the saturated fat. We talked about pancreatic lipase that breaks down the unsaturated fat. See, lipase is a fat-breaking enzyme. So what fat does hormone-sensitive lipase break up? Our fat stores. The human growth hormone also stops the body burning glucose as fuel and becomes a fat burner. Let me show you why. See, glucose burns at 4 calories per gram, whereas fat, it burns at 9 calories per gram. And every weight loss book has this in psychedelic colours as the reason if you want to lose weight, don't eat fat. But they don't understand what a calorie is. A calorie is a unit of energy. And if you want a high energy food, what do you eat? Fat. Because remember, fat doesn't make you fat. Can you see why the body starts burning fat as fuel when you're really moving? Because fat's going to give more than twice the units of energy compared to glucose. I'm just giving you the basic science here. The human growth hormone also increases the body's ability to utilise protein. We've looked at the importance of protein this week. We've looked at the importance of not drinking with your meals so you can break down your protein. Are you practising drinking in between your meals? One man said, I keep reaching for the glass at the table. Tomorrow we're going to have a look at the brain and how you can rewire your brain. The human growth hormone also increases the circulation of the blood to the skin. You know what that means? Slows down aging. No wonder the movie stars pay $1,000 a week for this. I'm offering it to you cut price today. 15 minutes high intensity interval training a day will cause a release of the human growth hormone and it remains active for 24 hours. What a bargain. But regarding weight loss, can you see how important this is? So you combine the low carbohydrate diet, the high fibre, generous protein, great fats. You combine that with eating breakfast like a king and lunch like a queen and tea like a pauper, and yes, sometimes paupers don't eat. You combine that with drinking 8 glasses of water a day. You combine that with going to bed earlier. And what our guests say to us 6 weeks after the health program, learning this, after 6 weeks, 20-pound loss. That's pretty good. But probably the most amazing is as I close, I want to give you 2 stories of 2 type 1 diabetics. I'm giving you the type 1 diabetic story because type 2 is much easier to conquer. Type 1, what are we told? What do the princes tell? Cannot be conquered. So the first story I'm going to give you is Dan, who was only 19. He came to us. He had type 1 diabetes. He's on 90 units of insulin a day. He got diabetes at the age of 15 after a course of very strong antibiotics that the doctor told him had killed off the beta cells in his pancreas. And the doctor had told him, the prince had told him that the pancreas was dead. I said, is it gangrene? What's dead? If there's life going through, if there's blood going through the pancreas, there's life. Because what does Leviticus 17:11 say? The life of the flesh is in the blood. The first week, he was with us 4 weeks, Dan. The first week, if he got a blood sugar level low in the middle of the night, he'd take a candy. It always gave him a headache because it got the blood sugar level up so high. But that's what the princes had told him to do. The second week, he felt a bit guilty, so he ate an apple. Takes a while to eat an apple in the middle of the night. And the apple juice, it got it up, but it didn't give him a headache. Third week, if he got a blood sugar level low in the middle of the night, he'd jump down on the floor and do 30 push-ups. And it will get his blood sugar level up. Where'd that come from? His glycogen stores and his fat stores, they're already there, they're already inside of us, and they just need us to access it. Hydration and exercise will do that. In fact, one morning, I have to tell you the Australian standard. So the Australian average blood sugar level in Australia will be 6. He woke up one morning, his blood sugar level was 3. That's almost passing out. He took salt and water, got dressed, took more salt, more water, put his joggers on, went for a run, came back, took his blood sugar levels, they were 9. And he'd eaten nothing. Where'd that come from? His glycogens and fat stores. After 3 weeks, he said, "Why didn't anyone tell me about glycogen?" Diabetics' best kept secret. We've got stores in there. There's no need to eat, because remember, as we saw last night, you keep putting food in the stomach, you disrupt digestion. Put the food in, then leave it be. Leave it be, let it do its job. Have you ever had a 4-hour job to do and it lasts 8 hours because you keep getting interrupted? That's what happens with digestion. Put the food in and let it be. You want happy kids? Only feed them at meal times. Many kids are miserable because their poor stomachs are just overworked, because they're being fed all day long. And the parent wonders why they don't eat their dinner. No wonder they don't eat their dinner. They've been fed all day long. By the time Dan went home, he was on 10 units of insulin a day. How many units was he on when he came to us? 90. 90. And he was told he was a type 1 diabetic. Was his pancreas dead? No. Why was he getting blood sugar level low in the first couple of weeks? Because he was on too much insulin. Because insulin has a one set mind, I must get that glucose out of the blood, down. The 90 units of insulin a day allowed him to live on this high carbohydrate diet. So the second story, my final story, is a man named Bob who came to our retreat, 62, type 1 diabetic. He was a fairly wealthy man, and his doctor had told him, his specialists had told him, "Stop, specialists in the land, we can do no more for you." He was basically considering retirement. He was carrying about a 60-pound excess weight. He could hardly walk. He was on statin drugs, he was on 90 units of insulin a day. He was on blood thinning medication and blood pressure medication. He came to the retreat, he said, "You're my last hope." He said, "I don't know even why I'm here. I met a lady at a swimming pool and she told me that she reckons you can help, but he said, my doctors have said they can do no more for me." He said, "I won't be able to walk, my legs are swollen." I said, "That's right." But I said, if you get on the rebounder every hour for 1 minute and do the health bounce. What's the health bounce? Got that? That's how you start. Just the health bounce. Within 48 hours, the legs had gone down by half. He was eating high fibre, generous protein, great fats. He was with us for 2 weeks. On the end of 2 weeks, he's on 10 units of insulin a day, type 1 diabetic. What an incredible body we live in when we give it the right conditions. He emailed me 3 months later. He said, I'm off all my medication. He said, my blood sugar's normal, my blood cholesterol's normal. He said, everything's normal. I said, tell me about your exercise program. He said, I swim 30 laps of the pool a day. He said, I cycle 10 miles a day. Sorry, 6 miles. 6 miles a day. I'm on the rebound of 3 miles 3 times a day. He said, after 3 months, he said, I've lost 40 pounds. He said, when he got home, his 42-year-old wife looked at him and said, this is your baby. I like my croissants and my champagne. He said, after 3 months, she's interested. The second email I got, he said, she's doing the diet. She's very happy. She's just lost 15 pounds. You see, the best thing you can do for your family is live the life. This couple got remarried because this man was no longer cranky. When the blood sugar levels are high, anything goes. When the blood sugar levels are low, he's biting everyone's head off. He went back to work and he said, watch out, I'm back. He went back to full-time work, and his workers no longer feared him because he had a different nature. Because instead of highs and lows, his temperament was like this. So simple. And I love the way God meant it to be simple. Not complicated, but simple. And notice there's no expensive supplements. It's lifestyle. And so we have seen incredible results just with these simple lifestyle changes. Choose your hard. This man's life was very hard. He went to a plant-based diet. He went to 2 meals a day. He went to this intensive exercise program. Was that hard? It was fairly intense, but look at the results. That couple remarried because they were new people. So thank you for your attention, but I thank God. I thank God for the simplicity of these lifestyle changes, and I trust you've been inspired. In my book, Sustain Me, I've got these principles outlined in detail, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow night. Thank you. Thank you.